Welcome to the Cowboy Office Show, where you'll experience expert analysis and epic discussion on key pillars of the equine industry, including sports, business, hobby, and the horse lifestyle. Your co-hosts are Jody Brainerd and Brian Dykert, industry veterans with over 120 years combined living the cowboy lifestyle. The Cowboy Office Show will help you get involved, ask more questions, and create change. We'll keep riding for you as together we learn from the ride already ridden, learn to listen better to our horse, and make our industry better for all. Each weekly episode will take a ride around the industry in less time than you can load the truck and trailer. Drop your email at cowboyoffice.com to receive weekly updates and never miss an episode. Saddle up as we ride into today's show.
Hello, Horse World. We got to start by saying congratulations to OSU, Oklahoma State University Equestrian Team. Whoops 'em. Big 12 champions for 2024 gets the invite to the Nationals. They're on their way. A big congratulations. We all know the rollbacks are the hardest maneuver in the sport of reining to mark, so we're going to start this show by showing you a few excellent ones. We'll start with Nathan Piper doing a left rollback, riding Dr. Voodoo. Watch this. And this is just that maneuver. So it's an approach, a stop, and a left rollback. And if you've ever wondered what excellent looks like, there it is. And here's the second one. Jody, this is Wayne on the exact same maneuver.
To see this one live, and it just is really hard to make it any better. I mean, this horse's approach is excellent, the stop is excellent, and that sweep and roll back is excellent. It's like, how do you make it better than that? Excellent plus.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. I'm not sure how you make it different, but I thought the thing that was fascinating between both of those is the fact that they're two great examples of excellent, but not the same. And that's where everybody that kind of enjoys our sport and watches it and follows along, because they use a comparative reflex so much. These are not the same, but they're both excellent. And
that's a great statement. I think probably it probably took me 20 years to learn that excellent is not perfect. It's excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, from a judge's standpoint, I certainly, in the last 15 years, I have become much, much better at that, as far as that maneuver evaluation assessment when it comes to very good and excellent, because, I think that there's a point when you're training lots of horses and you happen to think that plus 1.5 has to be perfect. And even though those are examples for me of perfection, because every part of that was just incredible, but that word excellent doesn't mean perfect.
Right. Point well made. This is Dwayne, the exact same maneuver, but just running in slow motion. And I think that this is a phenomenal educational piece, because where people miss it, and every part of this is phenomenal. There's no doubt about it, but it just lets you see it all that much more real. But the roll, wow, when you talk about one motion, front end over the hocks, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you could put this horse at the American in the cutting competition with those really good 5 cutters, that sweep right there in front of a cow you'd have seen exactly the same thing. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you? I mean, if that horse were on a cow when he made that full sweep, it was exactly the way that I would have wanted to. If I were on his back and had a cow in front of me, that's what I would have wanted to happen.
Just so that the audience can have a comparison, we do have same maneuver, another exhibitor, and displaying the type of rollback on this maneuver that we see a lot. And this is one of the reasons why we see such a variance and why marking rollbacks is so difficult. So I want to show this one just as a comparison, because this is not what a rollback is.
Yeah, we've seen lots of examples of that. I would start by saying, Martin, we're not picking on you, buddy. I could show you 500 examples of myself doing exactly the same thing. I think a lot of times it happens because of the horse that we're on and the moment that we're in that competition. We don't train for that. Sometimes it just happens, but it's also up to our officials to make sure that there is a big difference in how that maneuver is evaluated, because that over rotation, the cow's gone. You know what I mean? If a horse did that, it's like that's not what our rule book says the definition of a rollback is.
Right. And that's where we all get a little bit stuck in today's time.
We've seen lots of examples of that, I think, and especially in some very high level competitions. And I think we probably made some big strides as far as maneuver evaluation from the officiating standpoint, because I think when we first started to see that, 10 years ago or thereabouts, where we became kind of more or less, we'd see that, because there was a time that I can't remember that I ever saw those over rotations and half turns before, and the rollbacks before. But the half turn is a fine example of it, because that's exactly what it is. It's kind of a half turn and then a lope out, but we'd never see those things. And I think that, Brian, you chaired the judges committee, I chaired the judges committee. And, when you see examples of that or something that you haven't seen before, you have to figure out how to teach it, right? I mean, if you're not okay, well, what are we going to do with that? And when that first happens with a set of judges, it's like, whoa, well, what do we do?
Yep. Well, I would tell us, I hear you. And there's several things that would be similar to that conversation when you study the sport and look at the evolution over time. Similar would be the slowdown. Remember when we went through the whole thing when horses were grabbing the ground with their back feet and whether they broke gait or not? And we've learned our way through all of that, and we don't see those anymore. We see downward speed transitions that are actually phenomenal that we used to dream about. So I think all of those things drove the evolution forward. I think your point's very valid on the rollbacks, and this is my opinion. Where it came from is because we got so focused on the top line and keeping those horses low-headed, if I use that thing, that the only way some of those horses can get themselves inverted in direction is they've got to flop their body. And so that's what created the beginning of seeing the turn and the lope departure, because those horses were having to keep their top lines in frame. And these other horses that we just saw 2 examples of, you had made reference earlier on that if you go back and study those maneuvers, the top lines of those horses, the balance of those horses does not move from the time they begin to accelerate until the time they depart. And that's telling you what kind of athletic animal you got, right?
Absolutely. And that's a great description for our viewers too. When you talk about a horse that, I think when they started concentrating on low heads, what happens is you have the initial weight shift. And, when you have a horse that's carrying equal weight on his front end to his back end, he turns around his belly, which means that he he pivots around the middle spot, which is where that
Yep.
over rotation comes from. He's not turning off his bunt, which is where they are supposed to be. So yeah, it's absolutely, the answer is always in the middle.
It
Right.
is.
Yeah,
And not
there you
turning
go.
in the middle to turn off the butt.
No,
So
exactly.
This show's
Thanks.
all about the Run for the Million qualifier 2024, held at the Cactus Raining Classic here in Scottsdale just a couple weeks ago. Welcome to the Cowboy Office. I'm Brian.
Well, welcome. I'm Jody. We're rain and reach for Vegas, March Mania, and raining for finals in August.
I'm Chelsea. I'm so excited to be with you. I'll be moderating today. And man, what a great start to the show. This is going to be a good one.
Well, I hope so. Anyway, we're now pushing 5 years on the Run for the Million and doing the qualifier. I think this is phenomenal. You know, there is no other sport that has a qualifying. I mean, you can take some of that concept on how do you get to your world finals, but to qualify in March for finals in August, I think is a phenomenal, step for our sport. I think it's just great. And it's providing high quality competition early in the year. And we're now seeing it for the 5th year in a row. So I toodles to all of them. And God bless all the producers and the people involved with the Run for the Million, because it is doing great stuff for the industry.
And what a cool competition. I mean, we've seen non-pros compete against open riders. We're seeing women and men truly compete equally. I mean, reining as a sport already provides that platform, but this is taking those who really have a yearning for being the best and producing the best and pairing with the best athletes to, bring their best and show up for this competition. And we've now seen it year after year, go for $1 million purse. So it's a super exciting time to be in the sport.
Well, here they are. Here's your top 10. This is what qualifies, including, I think there's 17 total, because there was 5 that qualified from last year, and then 1 or 2 coming out of Europe, I think. I might be a little bit off at 16 or 17. They continue to advance what the Run for the Million's doing, but holding true on that 16 or 17 individual competitors in August is providing for a phenomenal event and great rating. But here they are. Dwayne Latimer wins the qualifying. So, out of 97 horses and about a handful difference, there was 100 and a few last year. So you're right at the same volume. There's some interesting pieces in this year's. We do have the data so that we can compare last year to this year as we kind of go through the show. But Dwayne Latimer marks 225.5. Jordan McBurney, new faces we've got this year qualified, 223.5 to a 222. 222 is the cut line, and we'll spend some time talking about this, but they had a 4-way tie for 10th, and they had to run it off. And so, again, you got a deep competition in a very small box, all trying to go for $1 million purse. Casey Hinton, Fernando Silva, Sean Flaherty, Francisco Martinati, Craig Schmerzel, Luca Fapani, second year pro, good for him. And he's banging out Gabriel Borges. He actually rode 007 that won the 100X last year. Phenomenal. And then Jared Leclerc. So it's going to be a good one.
Indeed, yeah, and including the 5 that have already qualified, and like I said, the horses that are coming from Europe are great horses also. So yeah, it'll be an exciting reining, and I don't want to ride the horse to death, and I have to really admit that how old we are. But again, we've talked about this in the past on some of our shows, our Cowboy Office shows, but we couldn't have imagined this 25 or 30 years ago. I laugh because I think some of the young riders are like, well, this is supposed to happen, right?
Right.
I mean,
It's normal.
Like, no,
it's normal.
It's not. It's like,
Yeah, it's not normal. Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
And just for term clarifications, it is 16 riders. So it was 5 from the open shootout, 1 from overseas from the event in Lyon, France, and then 10 from this qualifier that we just saw here at the Cactus Classic.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and to think that you probably wouldn't be able to buy a ticket now to get there.
Right.
To watch
Well,
it. So
they're not on sale yet, so you can't. But last year they sold out in like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So again, what a first. And I agree with you. The young guys coming in thinks this is normal. It's not. I hope there's a lot more. I can't even imagine what that means, but there is a lot more. There can be a lot more. It's a large part of what you and I spend so much time kind of working on, Jody.
Absolutely.
And you're 100% correct. We couldn't even dream of something like the Run for the Million.
I think the opportunity for what's cool is the fact that this has sold out now multiple years in a row. There are multiple days now added to the event from a cow, horse, and cutting perspective, which is another conversation for another day. But those events are packing the stands. And to me, that tells us that reining and these working Western disciplines are not only attractive to us who love the sport and are in the sport all the time, but they're attractive to the outside public. And the opportunity for this to be a normal thing, right? Something that we see recurring over and over in our sport throughout the year is sort of on our doorstep. And I think the rest of this show, we're going to dig into the statistics of, the judging and officiating and what that brings from this event, which is all a conversation that is about how we elevate our sport, bring more transparency to the scoring system, and make that easier to understand for the general viewing public. So kudos to Amanda Brumley and the entire Run for a Million team, because they're giving a platform for the sport to continue to not only elevate, but to normalize these types of events and bring this type of payout to our professionals and our elite athletes.
Oh, without a doubt. That Brumley and the Run for the Million production team, and I know that Taylor is highly involved in all of that. Taylor Sheridan, the producer of Yellowstone, and a number of other, entertainment movies, which I think a lot of people are very familiar with. But that vision that they had, I think is pretty phenomenal, and they're doing it. And I give kudos and a lot of respect to the American Teton Ridge and the American Performance Horsemen, because pulling those advanced disciplines together with rodeo, if you walked through the airport for my lifetime with a cowboy hat on, somebody would say, "Oh, do you ride rodeo?" That's all they knew. Now, in rodeo, cutting, reining, cow, horse, roping, barrels, now a general audience is knowing some of the differences of those things and finding their own interest. And I think it's phenomenal.
No, it absolutely is. And I'd love to get you guys to dive in and share some insights with our audience. You guys know you can go to cowboyoffice.com, drop your email in, and you guys will get the first updates to these episodes when they drop. Jody and Brian have done such a great job at putting in the research and analysis on the numbers. And can we kick it off by looking at 2023 in comparison to 2024 from a statistics perspective? Analysis of the score, maneuver marks for those top 10 qualified, comparing last year to this year, and what that means for the competition as well as for what we're going to see this year in Vegas.
Yes, I have a few pieces that I've got a ton of stats. We have a ton of stats. So the simple answer is yes, and we have them put together in some comparative forms. So here's one, because what this shows you is the scores. One, what it took to make the top 10. This year was a 225.5. Last year was a 230. And it was a amateur, a non-pro that won it, which is a whole nother very interesting conversation. So 222 to make the cut. And so all this shows you is the blue is last year, the green is this year. So a 226.5 was the cut last year to a 230 on the top. 222 this year is a cut with a 225.5, 3.5 point differential for 10 horses. That was exactly the same for both years. The scale itself, they were more conservative this year. So the marking of the competition this year was more conservative than last year. That's true. And we'll go into some of those things. I thought that this was quite interesting because you're talking about almost the same volume of horses, basically 100 head of horses trying to make the top 10 to go for $1 million. The top 45 horses last year, top 45, last year marked a 222, which was the cut line this year. Those top 45 horses this year was a 218. And then when you take it one step farther and look at the top half, it's the top 60 horses. Last year's qualifier, top 60 horses marked 220 or above. That's phenomenal by the numbers. And this year, the top 60 was a 217. So that's what it's telling you, which means they marked, the question is, was this year's batch of horses or competition less deep or not as deep as last year? The answer is no. Do you think so, Jody?
Oh, heck no. Like I said, we made the trip to be able to watch those things live because it's, there's so much difference between seeing those horses live and watching them on a tape, right? It's like, well, not a tape anymore, right?
I was just going to say, can we?
Yeah. Okay, so sorry about that. Well, it's like, okay, I get it. But okay, so when we watch these things on the computer as opposed to watching them live, there's a big difference. And so I think that, since we sit and watch those horses, we can speak relatively accurately about what we saw. And I think that there were a couple things that would come to mind for me. First of all, is that the degree of difficulty in this pattern was low. And the quality of the horses were sky high. I mean, these guys, they're trying to qualify for $1 million runoff, and you're not going to bring a bad horse, and you're not going to have him not ready, and you're not going to bring an unsound horse. I mean, they bring the best aged horses that they have. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it showed. Those horses were good, but it makes it very difficult to separate a lot of times, even on a high end level, when you have a 7 maneuver pattern with a low degree of difficulty. And I don't know who picks it. I mean, but I've had the same gripe a lot of times about, professionals picking up, pattern 6 or pattern 8 for the NRHA Derby go round, because every horse that walks in that pen is capable of marking a 74. Yep. So it just, and they do. So I'm not a big fan of trying to separate. I get protecting horses, and I get that guys want to try to be maybe a little bit soft with a lot of aged events that are coming up, but none of these aged events are going to pay what this one is qualifying for, right?
Right.
I mean, this thing is this pays $500,000, and it's like, I don't care if you got to run 9 or 10 or you got to run it twice. I'm like, pick something that makes these horses and the riders challenge.
Right, which is really about pattern selection, and the difference being this isn't just a go-round. This is a one-round qualifying, so they showed everything that they had. And yes, this, pattern 14 is a 7-maneuver pattern, just like 6 and 8, and yes, it marked quieter. The degree of difficulty in the pattern is lower, so it makes the official's job even harder. That's true, and then you put 100 head in it, so I agree, and I think that that's a very valid point. When you and I walked in there, that was one of the first things we said. We also noticed, and this one didn't make any sense, was how they had the officials, because it's a 5-judge system, how they had the officials kind of all gathered together looking through the same window. That makes no sense to me. Do you have a take on that?
No, I asked you that same question too. It was kind of like we've got, chairs 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, but, they're typically are spread out much further. So, your 2 being on the center marker and, 1 and 3 being spread. I think these guys were pretty close, and it's a big pen. And chairs 4 and 5 were also close together. So I don't know if that was just an oversight of whoever set the thing up, or if they wanted them there on purpose for whatever reason. I can't tell you that, but they were very close together, which means that they're going to see a lot of the same things. So
correct.
I don't have a reason,
Yep.
I can't.
And the numbers say that, because the final scores, and when you look at score spreads, their score spreads were much lower than historical. Did they have a 4-point score spread? The answer is yes. Did they have some 2.5, because where we draw the line on a 7-maneuver pattern, 1.5 points score spread is actually normal. So that's true. So anything over that, then you could be looking at the details of why those spreads would occur, and you can always find the answers. But when you take 5 officials and put them through the same window, it seems counterintuitive to me, because you would actually want better complete observation of everything that's happening and better recording of it. That would be me. But anyways, that's all I know.
Which is, I mean, that's interesting to hear you guys talk about, because there's been many shows where, I mean, every show that you analyze scoring statistics, you are analyzing what those maneuver spreads look like. So I do question whether maybe minimizing score spreads was an attempted goal. And maybe that's the wrong goal, right? Maybe that's the wrong tool to minimize score spreads. I'm not sure, but would that be potentially a reason to put those chairs closer together, is minimize the spreads?
Sure. Of course it would. That was my first reflex. And when Jody and I walked in that Coliseum and kind of looked at it, Jody asked me, he said, man, why are the chairs so close? I said, probably because they want the scores to be close. So it was just a reflex. And the answer would be yes, but that's also where we all came from, which I would take you back to my downward transitions, the half turns and a rollback. We never used to see them. Are we evolving as a sport and an athletic discipline? Of course we are. And the officiating's got to do the same thing. So yes, that's got to be happening. The pressure from the industry has always been keep the scores as close to possible. That just makes common sense. I would tell you that's the wrong message. And what we've done is a poor job of educating ourselves that you actually want a different view. That's why you have 5. That's why you spend the money on the resource and you do the expertise, blah, blah, blah. You want a complete recording of what happened. There is no hiding and reining. That's one of the beauties to the sport. So then the answer becomes what's happening inside those runs. And we don't spend the time educating ourselves on that. And that's a large part of what we've been doing with the Cowboy office. So we'll keep going. But that's the answer. And those were interesting, noteworthy observations when we went in there. So we'll step into the stats and the facts quick. We do have runs that we're going to show, but let's do the stats. Last year, 102 entries is what they had. The 226.5 to a 230, which when you average that, 75.5 to 76.7, that's just reverse math. And it's, again, a 3.5 point differential. Well, that's exactly the same as this year. This year we have 90 entries vying for the 10, a 222 to the 225.5, which the reverse math is a 74.2 to 75.2. And it's interesting when you look at the numbers and then you put the numbers against what the competition's actually doing. This is interesting when you look at it side by side, because this is the top 10, and this shows you all 3 of what I just talked about. And I've got more. We've got more. The left screen is last year, 223. Gina Marie wins it with a 230, 1.5 point spread. So you can look down the top 10 last year, and to the right side of the screen is this year, 2024. Dwayne wins it with a 225.5, a 1 point spread. And when you look at the point spreads, you'll see, and yes, they had 2.5 point spreads, but there was only 3 of them of the top 10. Last year, you actually saw more variance inside the scores to the spread. I don't want to spend the time on the score spreads only because I think there's only minimal value when you look at the individual scores. There's a lot of value when you look at the maneuver scores. A lot of value.
I want to jump in quick and just ask a quick question. We were talking about patterns, and you guys were saying that it marks low and is conservative. It's interesting to me, there's a 3.5 point differential last year and this year that separated, that first place spot to the last person who got qualified. Was there any role in the pattern this year causing that number to be lower, causing that number to be at the 225 place rather than that 230 place? or is that just the conservativeness of the judges from this year?
The simple answer is, did the pattern make the difference? The answer is no, because the pattern is very similar to 6 and 8. It's
Okay.
just, and I would, Jody, tell me if I'm wrong, because pattern 14 is a spin, spin, too big, fast, small, slow, which is not as difficult as big, fast, small, slow, big, fast. And when you have to do that twice. So pattern 14 would actually run, it would mark quieter and more conservative because the difficulty isn't there to give you the challenge. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So was it the pattern? No.
No. And I mean, sometimes obviously, if you have an 8 maneuver pattern as opposed to a 7, you're going to have a higher score from an individual basis because you've got an extra maneuver to mark. But what I'm talking about is, our highest degree of difficulty patterns are 4-stop patterns, which means you have to run in, stop, back up, do your turns. And, 10 is a difficult pattern. Pattern 9 is probably our most difficult, just in my opinion, because you have a large, fast lead change to a slow, small, which is, there's a high degree of difficulty right there because so many things happen at once. But I don't know if the professionals picked this. I don't know. I'm who picked it. But sometimes I can talk about professionals' lack of imagination when we talk about patterns, because I think some guys feel that if they come up with a backwards pattern, it's going to do their horse some good. And it's like, no, that's not going to do you any good. It's like, you need to use a little imagination if you're trying to, pattern 3 was a great schooling pattern. So
Yep.
we need more of that. Not, okay, let's run pattern 6 backwards, or let's, oh no, let's not do that. Let's come up with something new.
I agree with you. And my opinion, have they done a poor job of developing more advanced patterns? Yes, they have done a poor job. The industry has not done that well. Have we added more patterns? Yes, but they're just casual variations of what we started with. Could we be creating patterns for the different sectors of the sport, including schooling? Yes, and we're not. Including, could we have advanced form patterns that are not only dynamic for an audience, but truly are challenging the horsemanship levels that we're seeing? Yes, and we're nowhere near it. So you're 100%
Right.
correct on that one. Your question's valid, Chelsea, and I want to show you this because it answers that question, because the patterns between last year and this year were very similar. So it wasn't the pattern. The thing that is interesting is when you look at the scores. This chart shows you a comparison. This is the top 10 maneuver scores marked in the top 10 horses 2 years. Last year's on the left, that's the pink, the 2023, and this year's on the right, 2024. And you can see the difference. There were no 1.5s, no plus 1.5s marked in the top 10 horses that made the finals. That's true. That's the right-hand side. They actually went from a minus half to a plus 1 in the top 10 horses last year. And if you look at the plus half and plus 1, they used plus half twice as much this year as they did last year. They used plus 1 half as much time as they did last year, and they didn't use plus 1.5, this really answers the question on using the scale, because that's what we talk about. And of course, the blue is the correct score of 0. So you had 1.5% of all the maneuvers last year were correct. This year you got 6.5% of all the maneuvers, and those patterns are very similar. So it wasn't the pattern; it was the standard and the tightness of the scale being used.
Well, I think that's fascinating. And you had said something to me years ago. I don't remember what question I asked you, but I'm sure it was from my perspective as an announcer, not a judge, hence the reason that it was the wrong question. You corrected me. You corrected me by saying, it's not about comparing one run to another on the scorecard. It's about comparing what the horse showed you to what the scorecard marked, and is that accurate? When you look at last year's scores to this year's, like you just pulled up, you guys tell me you saw this competition live. Were there opportunities for that +1.5 to have been marked? Did the horses give the judges that chance, or was this not an excellent level reining?
Oh boy. And it's, it's, and here again, it's, because I have worked with everybody that was sitting in those chairs. And so, I mean, I have, and I know them, and I know judging, and I've seen all things happen. If you chair the committee or you're monitoring major events, you see a lot of things happen, but I think it's probably a monitor's job to set that scale before that rein starts. But yeah, there were a lot of opportunities to go ahead and call a maneuver excellent. I mean, I've seen it live. I was surprised. I can't give you a reason for that. Like I said, the guys were conservative. Brian and I, we had some discussion about that, and I don't need to get into it too deeply, but I don't know, maybe, one of the first things that we would always tell our guys that are working underneath us is you need to pay the first one when they come in the pen. And because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. You get yourself locked into a low scale. And, maybe I want to say, hey, look, I'm going to give these guys credit because they started low and they stayed low through the whole reining. But could they have made their job easier if they used the scale? I think so. And I think if you asked each one of them right now after they got done marking it, they would go, yeah, because I know I would have if I would have been there. So, yeah, there were some really, really good maneuvers.
Yeah. The answer, Jody just answered it and couldn't be said any better. I want to show you a couple of very interesting graphs. This is your top 10 qualified riders from 2024. This is each of their runs. So from left to right, you got Dwayne Latimer on the left. He's at the top of the pile. Jared, Gabriel, and Luca all tie for 8, 9, and 10 after a runoff, but there they are. And what this shows you is what their maneuvers marked inside those runs, inside those patterns that each person does. So, and the reds are +0.5, the yellows is +1, the blues is a correct maneuver score 0, and the purple, because there was 2 runs, Craig Smerzel and Fernando Salgado had maneuvers that got -0.5. So, yes, that's very valid, but now I'm going to take you one more spot because this is last year's. So the top 10 horses left to right, Gina Schumacher's 230 is the left, and Casey Hinton was at 10 spot in the right-hand spot. But what you see here, and we did the analysis last year, how did Gina whoop everybody last year? Because she pulled more +1.5s. If we go back and look at this year, how did Dwayne whoop everybody? He pulls more +1s. Half of his pattern, 48.6% of his pattern were +1s of 7 maneuvers. But again, as we've talked about, a 7 maneuver pattern and a pattern that's not very difficult. These patterns were very similar. So one more, because when you put it together, this is comparing last year's to this year's top 10 and the maneuvers that they were marked. So the officiating at it. And you'll just see they didn't use +1.5. Did they have the opportunity? Yes, of course they did. We just showed you one of them. We showed you 2 at the beginning of the show. Both those horses were in this event. Dwayne wins it. And I would tell you that both of his rollbacks were +1.5. They marked them +1s. Now, it's not personal. It's about how do we get more accurate, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I could make a good argument that Dwayne stopped at 74.5.
Right.
I could call
just
each
in the
one
3
of them,
maneuvers.
all 3 of them excellent. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, it's but he's the winner, so
right.
It is.
So they did get it right. And this is where everybody says that the standard is the standard and the scale is the scale. The scale is the scale because we don't have anything more to work with. The standard does move, and it moves per day, per class, per everything. And even on the live stream during the qualifying, they made reference to the fact that they knew where the bubble was. The bubble, it was part of the audience participation because it went from a 220 to a 221 to a 222. And they actually made reference on the live stream that, well, now the officials know what the bubble is, they're going to protect it. And is that somewhat true? The answer is yes. Do they consciously do it? I would tell you no. But again, you got the human element. So are you using a comparative function in real time? Yes. What should we be comparing it to? It's what is excellent, what's very good, what's good. Not, did this horse beat that horse?
I think that, and it's been since they first started walking horse in the pen, to show. I don't think, no matter what the discipline is, but big classes, I mean, the accuracy is generally not at the top. I mean, those great horses are easy to mark. I mean, they got Dwayne in the right spot, and I mean, they got KC and Jordan. I mean, they got, those horses are great. There's first, second, third. Where the trouble lies is at the bottom end. Always, it does, and it doesn't matter if it's that horse that's the last horse to qualify for the NHA Level 4 Open Fraternity Finals. I mean, that's where the scoring issue always is, and the inaccuracies that count, and guys that have maybe, if the scoring has not maintained the same accuracy throughout the entire 3 or 4 days of a first go round, then someone, and we've all seen horses back when we had what, Silver Anniversary, maybe, the horse that she had to come in and draw number 1 and win that thing, but what did she have to do? What did they call that qualifying go round for those last 15 horses back in the day?
Consolation round.
Yeah, the consolation round. She had to win the consolation round even to get back into the finals, and then she goes in and wins the fraternity with dogs.
And she's draw 1 because the winner of the consolation is draw 1.
Right. So, and Elaine had the same thing.
Yep.
So remember when Elaine Allard had to do that, win the consolation round to come back. So anyway, those horses without a consolation round would have not made the fraternity finals and ended up winning it. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to say here is those bottom 4 or 5 place horses are extremely important. I actually did a lot of work on that years ago, taking the bottom end of the level 4 finalists and the top end of the level 3 finalists that just made that, going back and marking those horses again. And I found some inconsistencies that those level 3 horses should have beat the level 4 horses, but you got that horse and rider recognition back in the day. That's just part of it. So I mean, there is some spots that need a lot of help, but like I said, those great horses are easy to mark and they're easy to make winners. But when you're trying to sort through some horses that maybe have an excellent maneuver and then maybe a correct or a poor, and continue to judge those horses accurately, I think that's where we get into difficult spots, or guys do, because they have trouble separating those horses that are on that bubble that should be.
I completely agree. And to go along with that exact same thought, because I remember and I had a long drive home in the days, this is a long time ago, but when I wouldn't make the fraternity finals and mark 14s to 16s, that's a long drive home. What does, all the things that you go through your head and blah, blah, what could I have done different, better, blah, blah, blah. I was thinking, how would you like the ride home when you mark a 221 or a 221 and a half? Don't make the top 10 to go to Vegas. What's that ride home thinking about? And everything that we're talking about, because it's about the integrity of the sport and the accuracy for what's happening now. There's so much, the winner of the fraternity, there was only going to be one of them. Okay, fine. Everybody knew that. Now we're talking about one of 10 to go for $1 million, and to be 11th or 12th or 13th or 15th. I think that whoa. And then how do you analyze that and sort through it and look at your own scorecards and sort that stuff out? Because it's just a long ride home. That's the point to that. And I want to bring up one other piece, because that was a thought that I had. When those cut lines are somewhere between, and we've seen it now for 2 years. Cuts to finals is 220 and above. I think it's great. It just adds more pressure to everything else in our sport. The interesting piece between last year and this year was on penalties. Last year, there was 3 penalties applied of all maneuvers. Now, of 10 horses that make the finals, you got 350 maneuvers. That's true last year and true this year because there were 7 maneuver patterns. Last year, you had only 3 penalties applied, which is 0.8% of all maneuvers. This year, you had 18 penalties applied, which is 5%. It's 5.1%. And 6 maneuvers had penalties applied, producing 18 different penalty applications. Are you with me? Because here comes 5 of those maneuvers that had penalties were not unanimous. There was only 1 maneuver of the 6 maneuvers that had penalties that was unanimous across all 5 judges. Now that's different this year. We categorize penalties as minor and major. I would tell you they're all major because they're rule infractions. That's just me. Some people think I'm weird.
Who says that?
So I wanted to bring up the point and the detail about penalty application and the differential between last year and this year in the qualifier. Because last year in the top 10 qualified, there were only 3 penalties applied across 350 maneuvers. This year, it's actually interesting because you have 6 maneuvers that produce 18 different penalties being applied, which is 5%. And 5 of those maneuvers, so 6 maneuvers get a penalty. Only 1 of those maneuvers is unanimous. The other 5 are non-unanimous. And generally, and because we categorize these penalties with major and minor, which is reviewable and not reviewable, it brings up my point of there is no such thing as a minor penalty. They're all major because they're rule infractions. And so I've always been under the belief and understanding that penalties either happen or they don't happen. And we don't need to have that debate. But the fact that 5 of the 6 maneuvers that had penalties were not unanimous, if they were unanimous, would it have made a difference in the scores and the final outcome? And the answer is yes. But because we do what we do, they weren't. Because again, you get a dilution factor and a kick out. So that's what happens. But I thought it was very interesting when you look at the details inside. And will that also produce some of the score spreads that the spectators in the audience see? And of course they do. That's why you've got to always look at the details, not the score.
You make some fascinating points, and I just want to break this down for a second for those of us who don't sit in the judge's chair and are sort of sorting out what you just said. You're telling me that there were horses that made the top 10, which meant they are going to Vegas to compete at the Run for $1 Million, that had penalties in their run that not all judges applied. That's the non-unanimous. Had all judges applied those penalties, or had they been forced to be there, right? Had they been unanimous, those horses would not have been in the top 10. It would have affected their score enough to bump them out. Is that correct?
Well, the answer is yes. According to everything else staying the same, but I don't know if that would be true. Would everything stay the same if all penalties were absolute? I'd have to do the rest of that analysis, but the simple answer to your question as we know it now, would it have made a difference in final score outcomes? Yes.
Which, Jody, goes to the point you made a few moments ago about it's not that we're not putting the first place horse in the first place spot. We are. It's that the difficulty of separating horses is beyond first place. It's deeper than that. And it's, in this case, you're talking about a cut line to go back to the Run for a Million, you're talking about payout and purse distribution, but that's what you're talking about, right? It's those distinctions below first place and the tools that we have or don't have to separate them.
Absolutely. I mean, it's no different than a human professional in professional sports somewhere. I mean, it's like it's that guy who who can manage to step to the plate and hit that ball and get him a single in the World Series and win the game, maybe wins the whole thing. So it's like that it's just as important to be accurate at that level as it is to be accurate at the high end, and maybe even more so, because I've been on that end before. More than I have on the top end. So, right? I can appreciate it more.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Well, and now we're seeing events like this more and more frequently. I mean, obviously you've got the Run for a Million every single year, but you have other events like, I mean, the American Performance Horseman is taking a cumulative of earnings across the year, and they take the top 5. Well, if you talk about earning money in the 5th spot or 10th spot or 15th spot, and that dollar figure contributing to whether you make the 5th or 6th spot, I mean, those dollars and cents make a difference. They make a huge difference.
Well, the casual conversation is why in last year's fraternity did they not take the co-champion was because it made a difference to Brian Bell making the top 5 for the American Performance Horseman. Boom. Yes, of course. And are we at a different place in the industry? Yes. Is it better? Yes. But we've got to do some more things better.
Absolutely. I think not to interrupt, excuse me, but I get an idea, and it's like, go on. Passionate, right? It happens it can happen at the top end too, and I cannot say that there's not room for ties. I cannot say that because I mean, hell, racehorses have a dead heat, right? I mean,
Right.
It's a photo finish and it's a dead heat, and it's rare as hell, but it happens. So I mean, it can happen, but should the percentage of ties that we're having at our high-end events be there? I am in complete disagreement with that. I don't think that those are supposed to be there. Heck, we're talking about the Run for the Million. What did we have the first 2 years of it? Didn't we have ties to win that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yes, and they wrote their own rules so that there wouldn't be one. So,
right.
And good
After
for them.
the first one, and then they had a second one, so they had to have a runoff on it. But I'm just saying that I think that there's a better way to sort horses. I believe that, to separate positions and checks.
Can I ask you a point blank question, Jody? Is it time to update the system as we know it to serve the competition that we have at this level?
Well, absolutely, without question. And I would go a step further. That's a little bit of a leading question, but I happen to know that there is a new judges program that includes everything from a scoring system, changes in the penalty application, the ability to evaluate judges' performance ongoing, which would make the monitor's job much, much easier. And I know that it's ready for testing. I know that the parts of it that have been tested have performed beyond expectations. And I think that it's way past time for that. And I happen to know that program has been years in the making, and I happen to know the guys that have been involved in the years in the making of that program. So, yeah. Anyway, I can't wait for it to fully be tested. And I mean, it's a protected program. We put years of thought into it, and I think that it will be life-changing from the standpoint of the horse business, because we built it for reiners, but it absolutely, we can make it fit any discipline. So it's something that I'm looking forward to, and I think your father should be too, because he's like carried a huge load from the number standpoint on this thing. It's like, yeah. So anyway, to answer your question, hell yes.
Hell yes. Just in seeing a little bit of it over, the episodes that we've done together and some of the research that I've seen for you guys, what I do think is interesting is what you guys are working on and testing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of it is about elevating the system so that there is more integrity inside of the scoring and inside of how that plays out in results. Am I correct in understanding that?
Absolutely. I think that and those are, integrity is a word that I mean, I think that it's integrity is a hard word, because it means that maybe somebody's marking a horse and they don't have integrity. And I don't like to think that that's the case. I think that I would like to think that this system and the way that we have set this thing up to score will make it very easy for judges to increase their accuracy and to not be able to have, say, major penalty application, minor penalty application have an effect. We've taken lots of things into consideration. Brian, add here when I'm finished, but I think that, yeah, it absolutely will eliminate conflicts, which is potentially a problem now. I mean, the longer we go and the more money there becomes, there's always more and more of a conflict. But I think that this system will eliminate a lot of conflicts, and it will make officiating much easier and more accurate. Brian, is that fair?
It is. I'll simplify, and I agree with him, and maybe using the word integrity is the wrong word. That very well could be true. Accuracy is a big one, but I'm going to go back to the beginning, because when Snoblin and a group of founders created the system that we know, their focus was to minimize the subjectiveness, maximize the objectiveness. And accuracy is directly dependent upon more objective analysis. And the quest, and for our lifetime, when Jody and I were extremely active, finding the winner was the chore. That was the chore. Now we're beyond that. Finding the winner actually is, it kind of self-reports because of what competition itself does. Distributing purses is now what's going on. And so, making the finals for $1 million and the $2.5 million purse distro and the fraternity and 100X, all that stuff. Because now the difference of getting a paycheck and not getting a paycheck is very significant. And that's true across the year. So everything he's talking about in the work that we've been doing is making the accuracy go up by making the objective analysis go up. And it leaves the subjective expertise of the officials in place. But that's a very fine distinction, which is the difference between +1 and +1.5, not the difference between a correct score of 0 and +1.5. That is a huge differential. And so that's the other end of that. I just elaborated on it more, but that's what it is. I just said
it's great. I just had another thought too, that 20, 15 years ago, I don't remember how long ago it was. I want to say it's 5 years, and all of a sudden it's 20, right? But my good friend Sam Smith, who's been a judge forever, and Sam's great horseman, great horse trainer. Sam told me something at a judge's school when we were talking about this, and it's like, he said, I think when people are unsure, they look for a familiar face. And that's a very accurate statement. And I think from a judge's standpoint, that doesn't mean lack of integrity. It means lack of education. But when someone is not sure they'll look for a familiar face or a familiar horse. And I think that then becomes for them to separate something that they're unsure about. And it doesn't mean lack of integrity. Like I said, it means lack of education.
Right. And that's what we see.
And maybe even taking that to another level. Yes, on the see a familiar face and you go there, but I also wonder if our judges are sometimes in a situation where they are seeing so much depth. You take this kind of competition, they're seeing so much depth, they're seeing such good quality athleticism that they're going to a familiar score, right? Why were there no +1.5s when there's really good and excellent stuff? Well, because plus half and plus one are so familiar, and we know for certain that we can say that that is good. We can say that that is plus one. So I'll stick with that because that's familiar rather than that plus 1.5 that's maybe less familiar. I think we're seeing that as well in the reining competition. And I say that both in this competition as well as in, other events that I'm a part of and that I announce. It's familiar, and it's maybe not enough tools for those judges to increase that objectivity in a way that allows them to go to plus 1.5 or whatever other tool they need to use to separate those horses.
No, and I think we've got some tools in place that are coming. You've heard me say a lot of times that the judges need more tools in their toolbox, and we have some more tools. I think that will help that a lot, a great deal.
We're there, and the competition is demanding because the depth and the volume is there. And so, yes, every bit of it.
This wasn't planned, so I know I'm catching you guys off guard. But if somebody is producing a show or an event or is in a leadership role at an association that's interested in what you guys are working on, how did they get in touch with you guys to find out more about what you've got?
Cowboyoffice.com.
Okay, just reach
out.
Cowboy
direct. Office. You can put people do it all the time. A lot of the questions and a lot of these shows are driven around the questions come across from the website, and they're anonymous. There are people that do put their name in and have a question, and will we respond to it directly to those people? The answer is yes. If they don't tell us who they are and something, direct, then we put it into a show format and answer the question to a larger component. So that's the answer. And those are the things. There's other stuff that Jody and I are working on that, Pay Dirt is another one. You can go to Cowboy Office and find that as well. And so go to cowboyoffice.com.
Got it. Okay, great. Perfect. I know we have a few more stats to look at, and then there's going to be some runs that we show from this competition as well.
I want to show you two pieces of stats because it's just very interesting. But let me show you these real fast. This one, and maybe it's my quirkiness, but I've got two, and we won't spend a whole lot of time on it. This is what this does. If you look down the left, this is last year and this year, top 10. And what it does is look at, again, this just emphasizes and validates the use of the scale or lack of use of the scale. Because each bar it goes from the top -0.5 to the bottom +1.5. The blue is last year, the red is this year. And it just shows you the volume, which is the same thing that I showed you, vertical bar chart, which the point is this year's qualifying was marked much more conservative, and it just shows it to you here again. This one I want to show to you because this takes the entire Derby and qualifying, 200 runs across 2 days, does the stats and analysis on the entire thing. So this is the error rate because it's not about score spreads, it's about maneuver decisions. And this is very dynamic if you spend the time to understand it. The left-hand column is Friday's Derby. This middle column is Saturday's Derby and Run for the Million qualifying. And then the third column is the whole thing when you put it together, because that actually was one aged event spread across 2 days, basically 100 head each day. And the red bar represents maneuver scores that cross 0. The yellow bar is maneuver scores that spread by 1 point or more, which would be 0 and a +1 on the same maneuver. In any format, a 1 point maneuver spread or more. The beige bar are runs that have 2 or more of these 2 errors in it. These are the errors that we classify as clear mistakes. This goes to Jody's point about education. And then the back bar is just, it puts it all together. So when you look at that, and this is the amount of runs. So you're talking about half the runs in the entire aged event have errors in them. That's the bottom line when you get through it. And the error is an obvious one because it either crosses 0 or it deviates that maneuver decision by 1 point or more. So we've used that several times before, and so I wanted to continue to display that as we keep going forward, because that's the true, it's not score spreads. That is the true answer to what's going on in the runs in multiple judged scenarios. And it has nothing to do with the person. It has everything to do with the system.
If you are... Oh, go ahead.
Well, Jody said, we don't have enough tools. That's true. Do we need more tools to make finer distinctions? Yes, the sport has come that far.
Well, the error rate is something that you guys sort of coined and are calculating and analyzing over these major level competitions. That's not, a term you're going to find in the NRHA rule book or anything like that. So I think that's a fascinating concept. And I've heard you guys talk about, there's only 2 boxes for a maneuver, which is why you're calling this an error. If it's
Correct.
Spreading across more than 2 boxes, if you will, right?
Correct. Right. That's the 1 point. Yes, it's our definition. There is no definition. We don't measure the performance of officials. And it's our definition, Jody's and mine, the Cowboy office, because from our experience, when we mark horses together and we make a mistake, whether we both make the same mistake or one of us makes a mistake and the other doesn't, are we always working on that? Yes. And are we trying to be aware of it and then not repeat those mistakes? Of course. So from years of experience and the reality of what the officials are demanded to do, that's where those error rates, as we define them, and are we measuring performance? Yes, we are. And you can do it either on the negative or the positive. We're doing it on the positive, but it's built upon, where is what we don't know, and we're in pursuit to define this. What is the acceptable error rate in the open aged events in the sport of reining? We are trying to find it.
I'd question if 45% is it, but I'm glad you guys are working on it.
Well, the simple answer is no. Is 45% error acceptable? I would say no. The question is, number one, we can answer and defend why it happens. And it's not it's not the integrity piece. It's not any of those things. The bigger macro equation. That's the point. And that's what we've been spending the time on. So the rest of that is, where is acceptable? We're not sure. Jody and I think in our heads it should be single digit. It's under 10%. That's where it probably should be. But now when you take 450 horses in 6 days, is that achievable? We're not sure yet.
We're not. That's a great question. Is it achievable? And I think so. But I think along the same terms that to make it better, you have to admit it happens. You have to say, okay, this is happening. It's always happened. But does it happen with more frequency than it used to? Is it because the horses have got better that it happens with more frequency? That, say the crossing zero that we talk about, we never used to have as many issues with that from a percentage standpoint as we do now. Is it because our horses are better? Is it because of education? What is the reason for that? I don't have the answer for that. But I do know that for us to improve it, we have to acknowledge it. And sometimes that's hard for people to do too. It is.
I think what you guys are doing is great. And the question I think you're trying to answer, at least that I hear you subliminally saying, and I don't think you're intentionally subliminally saying it, is a single digit error rate possible in the current system's format? That is unknown, right? So I'm excited to see. I think you could have a whole show on error rates, how they happen, why they happen, how it's calculated, all that stuff. And that's not what this show is about, but it's, I think, a great tool.
Let's actually flip it over. Let's just talk about fundamental performance rate. Because if the error rate's 45, the performance rate's 55. So It just is. So let's take it from a positive approach, and how do we make it? How good can it be? Where is excellence in officiating on its accuracy? And nobody has that definite. Is it 80? Is it 75? Is it 92? Is it 99? Not sure. Is it ever going to be 100? I would probably say no. But where is that? The beauty, we've self-taught ourselves this, and the beauty of a 5-judge system and dropping the high and the low is that those three in the middle, the accuracy of those three in the middle is actually very high. It's very high. And I would tell you, I've got the numbers to prove it. It works very well. There's no doubt about that. Can it work better? That's the bigger question, and that's what we're in the pursuit of doing. And part of that working better is more tools. And then comes, does dropping high and low serve us in today's time like it has, for 60 years? Not sure on that one either. Dropping high and low works well. There's no doubt about it. But as we just saw in this qualifying, are there times that non-unanimous penalties will have a net effect on the outcome? Sure, of course there is. We can have that conversation. Do penalties happen or not? We've taught ourselves that maybe they do, maybe they don't. I disagree with that. I always have. So that's all.
I'll just drop this in here for those of you that might be listening and not have heard some of the previous Cowboy Office podcasts. There's an episode 25 that you guys talked and interviewed John Snoblin, who was a part of the origination of the system in its modern format, that if you're tuning into this one and your ears are perked up, that's a really great one to go back and listen to. That's episode 25. And you've also mentioned, Brian, last year's Run for a Million qualifier analysis. That's episode 15. If you haven't heard that one and are interested, that's a great one to revisit as well.
And that's what we're trying to do as we go forward, is use similar batches of stats and analysis across each of the age events. So at least we're getting some continuity and looking at it in a similar viewpoint. And then we just keep going forward. So it's equally fun being in this position, looking at the sport, as it was driving up and down the road. Some of those rides home were a little bit longer than others, but
this is a hell of a lot more fun. Yeah, right.
We're going to take a look at, this is Dwayne's winning run.
And while you pull that up, I'm just curious. I thought it was ironic looking at the leaderboards side by side, because Dwayne wins this year with a 225.5. Last year, Gina Schumacher, a quote unquote non-professional by delineation, wins, but with a 230. Do you think that they joke in the barn about the fact the non-pro client wins last year with a higher score?
Yeah, well, I think probably they do, and nothing, knowing Dwayne, he'd be happy that it happened. I mean, that's a guy that would say, heck yeah, let it happen. I mean, I think that's fantastic. I would add something to our viewing audience, though, and I've had a question, and Brian is the one that originally brought this up years ago to me, and every once in a while it kicks back to me when we're talking about amateur and non-pro competitors competing at this level. Should this be like professional golf, where an amateur is allowed to compete at a professional level and they can have sponsorship dollars, but they can't win prize money because they're an amateur or a non-professional on our level? I would put that question out to the viewing audience, and I would love to hear what some of the people that are watching this would have to say. That, I mean, is that a fair statement to let a non-pro or an amateur rider compete at an open level when they are amateur status? Because in pro golf it can't happen. You can win the Masters as an amateur, but you can't win any money. Now, sponsorship dollars, that's something that's entirely different, but just a question. Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
It's a great question. Go to cowboyoffice.com and tell us what you think on that. I think it's a phenomenal question. And are we as an industry ready to take some of those steps? Yes. And so that would be interesting too, as far as the business and relationship and competitiveness between Gina and Dwayne. So let's watch his run, because this is phenomenal. But it's a great question. So let us know what you think.
Yeah, I'll do you one better. We can post it on social media and see what everybody thinks in the comments.
And that's good all day long. There isn't anything about this run that's not. It's how good. And Jody, you had made reference, this horse, Dwayne's got this horse so well tuned in, but his top line is so consistent that everything this horse does is underneath the rider. And that's a whole nother level of quality.
Right. I mean, the balance that this horse has, I mean, it's like a general fits right here. This whole run.
Yeah, it's absolutely dynamic. And then it even gets stronger. So,
oh my goodness, now, yeah. Yeah, right now, here we go.
Right. I mean, you got plus half turns, you got plus one circles, and we're coming to the dynamic part of the sport and reining. This is the maneuver.
All right. And
that
he
was showed
was
at the beginning.
so good on the
Wow.
rundowns too, on the approaches. It's just like there's no drift, there's no lead change, just pointed in a direction and said, here, let's go.
Yep. And this is a happy horse. This horse's ears are always working. They're going forward and coming back to the rider, and it's just everything about it. That's
just hawks on the ground, great rollback.
Yep.
Just, yeah, excellent.
You could have done 1.5 on both.
You know, you hear a little bit of complaining about the ground sometimes, and then you see this and you go, yeah, right, it's bad ground.
CS Especially Moody. That's the horse ridden by Dwayne. Wins the qualifier. It's going to be interesting to see who he decides to take to Vegas. But it sure will be fun to see him there.
Yeah, he was riding there for XCS Ranch out of Gordonville, Texas on that one. Nice horse.
Yeah, right. If I was Gene, I'd say, get off.
My turn.
I'm riding that one, right?
Flip those two riders with those two horses. It'd be interesting. But it seems like they both kind of suit up with each of those. And Gina's horse is a shorter, a little bit more compact horse than what this horse is. But boy, Dwayne and this horse are dialed in. So it'd be interesting to see.
That run scored 225.5 on their scorecards. Pretty fancy run, you guys would say.
It was really good. Yep.
Yes. And could it have been higher? Yes. And so that's the rest of the conversation. And, you know, the point is they marked it tighter. They marked it more conservative. That's all there is to it. And it's in the circles in all three stops. And you're now talking about how good something is. But the difference between a plus half and a plus one, those are your two boxes on the circles. And in your stops, you should be talking about a plus 1.5. And they were talking about a plus half and a plus one. That's all. We're going to take a look at Mr. Dare. This is a really interesting one. And the big piece with Mr. Dare is the fact that he's sitting right in the bubble. He does not make it. But this run is sitting awful close to the bubble. And so it's worth taking a look at. This is Spat Toy Boy Gun. He marks a 221 on this run.
I was just going to say when they name him, I think they try and give us tongue ties.
Could be.
Spat Toy Boy Gun. Say that 5 times fast.
Because this horse doesn't make the cut. But this horse and rider do get two single maneuvers of +1.5. Both sets of circles are pretty fancy. Middle, he steps on the gas. He's got his hand right over his neckline. Pleasing to watch. All of the things of earning credit. Two big fast circles. He comes to the middle, says slow down. 1.5 strides, slows down with no change of balance. The real scorecards, 1, 1.5, 4 ones. And, again, I think the 1.5s are easy. Fat.
I was for excellent on that side.
Yep.
I called it. But, I mean, there's two spots for it.
Yep. Which is +1 or +1.5.
Yes.
And that maneuver they struggled with. And that's why, because you saw that horse's balance change through the stop. He doesn't take his feet out of the ground, but his body actually has to readjust. And they struggled with it. That's one of the maneuvers where they went from a -0.5 to a +0.5.
I was in the middle.
No. That is correct.
Poor.
Yep. And that's where it should be. He doesn't hold the ground. He doesn't commit.
What did our panel say on the last one?
2 zeros, 3 +1/2s.
This is one
Which
of
I
those.
said zeros was really good. What?
This is one of those runs, right, where you saw 2 maneuver spreads of 1 or more points. Is that correct?
Yes. This is a run that had 2 errors in it. It had a maneuver that had a 1 point or more spread, and it had a maneuver that crossed 0. The maneuver spread by a point or more was in the left circle, and the crossing 0 was in the first stop and rollback.
And would you say that stop and rollback happened being on the positive and negative side of 0? Is that because different judges are putting weight into that maneuver in different places? The ones calling it poor are putting more weight on the poorer side of, I mean, that was that rollback, right? So you've got the rundown, you've got the rollback, the lack of balance, as you mentioned, whereas that good judge is weighting it different. If you're Trevor, how do you understand what you're seeing on your scorecard?
Well, if I'm Trevor, or I was Trevor's advisor, how do you answer the numbers? The numbers say it was basically a +1/2 maneuver. That's what this says. That's what it says.
And you say that because of the math?
Of the math of the scores that marked it live and were official. Yes. So you're somewhere you're on the top side of 0 and the bottom side of +1/2. That's where the maneuver was, and that's what the official said. So if you're at home and evaluating that, what do you have to do? You got to. I would tell you that changing the horse's body's balance through the slide is that's the piece.
where to
So
clean
how
up.
do you get your horse to not do that? I'm not sure. Jody?
Yeah. Trev had the best seat in the house. He
Yeah.
knew. I'll promise he knew what it
Yeah.
felt like.
Well, and just thinking about the scorecard piece of it, right? Because I'm looking at the numbers and there's a -half, 1 0, and 3 plus halves. So yeah, all of that makes sense now hearing you guys analyze it. And of course, Trevor knows, where he can get more, what he can clean up. But just interesting to see, both poor and good be set on the scorecard. And so that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
this
that's
is
why
Go ahead.
when I showed you that graph, because we've defined those. Because if Jody and I were doing that, we'd be able to call each other on it. Hey, Brian, you're -half. What are you doing? You're being way too tough. How come? And then we could talk about it, and figure it out. And yes.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to point out for those viewing, because I had to wrap my head around this. Brian, you'd showed some graph earlier that compared last year to this year's maneuver scores and did not show any 1.5s marked, but that was in the top 10 horses. So I just wanted to point that out, that there were plus 1.5s marked in this competition. For example, he pulled 1.5s in this run, but he didn't make those top 10, so it didn't show up on that graph, correct?
Correct. He pulled 2 of the 4 that were marked in the entire 200 runs. He pulled 2 of them.
There you go.
So
I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
You have Tom in there somewhere?
yes, Mr. McCutcheon will be next.
This run is Tom on Super Mario.
Great case of life after the fraternity because there's a lot of life. And this is an interesting run all the way across. He marks a 219. He goes from a 72 to a 74 and a half.
Do we have penalty application in both of those turns on the official card?
Well, that's one of the not unanimous. Did some of them? Yes. Not on both turns. The first turn.
Yeah, we don't judge by comparison, but there's no comparison between this one and Trevor's.
Good, plus half circles, both ways around.
Yes, agreed.
And boom, there's a big trot step in there.
Yep, penalty 2.
Yep, and not good. And why? Because you got resistance.
Official cards were between -0.5, 0, and +0.5 on that one.
Correct. And they did not call the penalty.
The 2-point breakup gate.
Yeah. It's an interesting run all the way around, and it sits in that batch of the bubble of it. It's a 219 run, official score. Of the 5 cards, you got a 72, a 3, a 3, a 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and 4.5. So they literally climb up and down that ladder for all the varying factors that happen. And no, they do not take the 2-point break gate. Yes, you had a couple on the first spin. That's it.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, there's no question that there was a 2-point breakup gate. I think maybe that horse got a little trophy right before he actually broke gate, and I don't know if they just considered it bad movement. But yeah, it's a clear trot step.
Well, it's correct. We have the luxury. They don't. They're in real time, and 4 beating is getting less in our sport, which I think is a great thing. That's going away. But could you, if you blinked, yeah, you'd
miss it. Sure.
Yep, you sure would. The fact that they all missed it, they missed it. But the mere fact that you've got some bad stride in there and not a dynamic maneuver, that's one of those maneuvers they cross 0 on. So, and again, our definition is that somebody was wrong. That's all right. So, and does it happen? Yes. We're going to look at one more. And,
your error rate didn't necessarily take into account that missed penalty, correct?
That is correct. Officially, the penalty did not occur because it's not on the official cards. So it didn't occur.
Understood. Where are we going next?
We're going to watch Sierra
Beck.
Yep.
Out of the furnace.
The woman, one of the greatnesses of our sport. The horse does not care. Maneuver.
Both things being good and bad.
That maneuver crosses 0 and has a 1-point deviation all in the same time. And it's because it starts good and ends bad. And that's a prime case if there's not enough tools. That's it. Would you agree, Joe?
Yeah, just two different turns. I think there's a lot more inside bridle rein on the second turn also. So you can take that into effect. It's a difficult.
An official scorecard had a -half, 2 zeros, 2 plus halves.
That's correct.
She's pretty far to the inside.
And are you looking at that whole circle inside or just when she crosses middle?
Crosses center. When the center cone is not anywhere in the picture, I would say that she's staying on the safe side. What did we do maneuver evaluation-wise from our officials?
All 5 of them plus half. She leads him with the inside rein on that set of circles as well. Okay, that's just what she does. This set of circles, they take a deviation, and she can ride. You know, she'll bluff you a little bit. You got to watch it.
That good showmanship.
Great showmanship. She can ride. She can show one too. Myself, I would have plus half those.
Official scores 0, 3 plus halves, and a +1.
That's one of those maneuvers that has a 1-point spread.
Cards on that first rollback spread across 0. You had a -half, 2 zeros, plus half.
Yeah. And
the second one?
Second one was 2 zeros, 3 plus halves.
I called that one for 0.
Back with the best of the 3.
Officials give it all a plus half.
And we wanted to use that one because those are great examples of how hard it is. That's the bottom line to it. And, Jody always talks about we don't have enough tools, and he's right. Man, to be accurate is out there. And so that's what we're in the pursuit to do.
Example.
It is. It's a really good example. And because I'd questioned myself marking that run. You know what I mean? It's like you make your decisions and you stick with it, and you don't get to rewind it when you're sitting in the chair judging it live. And there's some serious tweeners there. And if I'd have had some more tools, I would have gone there.
Yeah, yes, serious tweeners. Yep. The bubbles. You've heard us talk about it a lot, Chelsea, but those are great examples of bubble decisions that are constant. And those, it gets to be hard. And it's not because judges aren't trying. They are trying. But that gets to be hard when you got 60, 70, 100. It's a lot of work.
And I can imagine when you've got 60, 70, or 100 that are all pulling plus halves and plus ones. And that goes back to Jody's analogy of sometimes you go with what's familiar. You just handed out some plus halves or plus ones that had cleanliness to them. When you see a maneuver like one of those that has some less than cleanliness, I can understand how you start to see a 1-point variation in maneuver scores or across zero.
Correct. And that's what we've got to get used to as a sport, a spectator, and a supporter. What does that mean? It's about understanding what those scores mean. Where do they come from? What are they saying? Yes, that's a big piece. So fundamentally, did they get it right? Yeah. Did they get the best 10 to the top 10? Not sure. It's interesting that they had a runoff for the 10 spot. It's still part of competition. And what does that all mean? We're just trying to educate and help everybody with the demand and how hard this stuff is while we're all loving what we're doing with this phenomenal sport. And it is the standard. The standard does move. Whether you want to accept it
Elaborate
or not.
on that.
This officiating is built against the standard of what the rule book says because it starts from correct. And so when you define correct, and correct in 2024 is very different than correct in 2020 and different than 1980. It is. So is the correct moving? Yes. But it will still move. It'll move per event. It'll move per class. It'll move per division. It'll move per day. When Taylor made a reference on the live stream of they're going to protect the bubble, that's moving the standard. It's not intentional. It's not a bad thing. It's a normal thing. Yeah. What's your hard decisions and what does your sense and reflex and things tell you? Benefit of the doubt. We can go down all those things that they've educated us on. I would tell you that the officiating has leaned on the benefit of the doubt more than it should, which would be similar to can a penalty happen or can it not happen? How do you get 2 judges tell me I got a 1-point penalty and 3 judges tell me I don't? I either do or I don't. That's all.
When we're talking about that, and Jody, I'll ask you this question. When you talk about the standard and it shifts, even if we talk about it, maybe shouldn't or we wouldn't like it to, if you were a judge yourself, going to go sit in the chair, or if you were monitoring an event like this, does prepping yourself or prepping your team against last year's competition, is that something that our industry is doing or that we should be doing? Would you recommend that?
I certainly would. I think that, and against last year's competition, it doesn't matter if it's last year's competition or the same year's competition. What I'm looking for are similar horses to warm officials up on that they're going to look at. That's why, Brian and I often talk about, NRHA fraternity judges that have to judge all day long and then have to judge the level 4 finals at night aren't necessarily prepped for that, because you're looking at some runs that are not if you don't want to go judge, 75 limited non-pro horses and then go sit and judge the level 4 open finals. That's not good prep. So yeah, I would say I would love to have the year before's horses on this run for a million qualifier, because we know that they were really, really good or excellent. So I'm going to look at the same type of horses. I would like my officials to look at the same type of horses. I don't want them to look at poor quality runs, because they're not going to see any minus halves. I mean, there's just not going to happen unless there's some huge error somewhere. But I need my guys, or I would like my guys and girls to be prepped to look at very good to excellent runs, because that's what they're going to look at. So yes,
We're going to look at one more, and it's one of our all-time favorites, and then we'll bring it on home. Mr. Matt Mills and Guns and Dynamite. We've seen them both several times, and again, he doesn't make the top 10, but darn sure was trying.
For sure. There's interesting happenstance in maneuver 2 here. We'll get to it, I'm sure. What did our officials say about maneuver 1, Chelsea? First turns?
First set turns 4 zeros and a plus half.
I called it correct myself, 0.
Officials on the second set had 2 plus halves and 3 plus ones. Go ahead, Jody.
That was an interesting spot. Brian and I had some discussion about this, and I agree that the spin itself was very good, +1, but the fact that he took 4 full steps to get his horse prepped to turn that direction, I have to make maneuver reductions. So I have half-point increments. I took that from a 1 to a half, and then I had penalty on top of it, so I had him leave the middle with no credit on that maneuver. But yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a horse walk 4 steps into a turn. I've seen some take 1 and some take 2. I'm good with it. But when you say, hey, I have to walk 4, almost like you're walking into canter departure, I have an issue. So
degree of difficulty goes down. Yes,
for sure.
It's an extremely valid point, and that's a fine distinction and detail where we are in the sport, which is also downward transition's good, but CA does it, 2 strides before middle, which all the other runs that we just watched were on middle. So not as difficult. And do you have to take those factors in? Yes. Do you have enough tools to make those fine distinctions? No.
First set of circles, official cards, everyone called it a plus half.
And they would be. And my criticism wasn't to take that away. It was just the fine distinction of what, and he does it again. He great showmanship, good for him. But the difficulty is not as dynamic as what we saw with Trevor and a couple of plus half.
Official cards on the second set of circle, 2 plus halves, 3 plus ones.
Our officials on stop and left rollback?
3 plus ones, 2 plus halves.
Okay.
And that would have been a bubble to a plus half in my book. Minus half all day and a trot. Half point.
Officials call that one.
Interesting enough, 2 zeros, 3 minus halves, and 3 of those judges called the half point penalty.
Right. I think it's pretty clear trot. A very poor maneuver.
And myself, I would have plus half that last one. And that's why
I called it good also.
Yeah.
Plus half.
But there's a run that goes from 71.5 to a 74. Marks a 219. Is in that batch of where was that bubble through the course of that entire day and run trying to find the top 10. He's in that hunt. Matt draws early. So this is draw 128, which is about it's 25 to 30 of the day of 100. So this is in the hunt all day. So anyways, it's just interesting stuff.
Absolutely.
So the reality is, what a raining. Again. Right?
It was indeed.
And it wasn't the ground, and it wasn't the weather, and it wasn't actually the weather was wonderful. So whoever didn't come to Scottsdale should have. It was a nice weekend. So it's going to be phenomenal to see what happens in August for the finals. 16 horses to go. Congratulations to the 10 that make it. Again, there's some new faces there.
I think it's exciting to see not only, who made it, because that obviously draws a lot of anticipation for Vegas this year, but to see the quality of competition and those nuances that's making the difference between who's making it to Vegas, who's not, who's making payouts, who's not, because this paid deeper than just 10 places. So you're getting awarded money. Further than that, you had a derby in it as well as 4 sections of open. So a lot of stuff in there. You had a full day of premier level competition, and the arena was also full. It was free to attend, and the crowd showed up for it, which, as anyone who loves this kind of a sport, you enjoy having the energy of the arena match the competition. So it's a good day to be a fan of reining.
It was a great crowd. Yes, it was. I mean, very enthusiastic, and it was fun watching. Yeah, it really was.
It was.
I enjoyed the heck out of it.
We did have a good time. And the crowd stayed. I mean, they stayed. That was 100 head of horses is a 9 to 10 hour day. They stayed. They wanted to see it, which that's a great thing for all of us as well. So congratulations to the top 10 that make it. It's going to be phenomenal to see them all in Vegas in a few months.
The Run for a Million. Yeah, dates for that, August 12th through 17th. It's a little bit longer this year because they've got a few more classes going on, which is going to be cool. Tickets aren't on sale yet, but you'll want to set your calendar reminders for when they do go on sale because they sold out fast last year. And I'm just saying this because I've seen it from the outside looking in. There's a lot of scam artists out there that attempt to sell tickets, so make sure that you guys are buying those from the official place. So keep your eye out for that stuff too.
And those that don't want to go in person, the pay-per-view is not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. And the fact that a lot of streaming is free, the fact that this one is a pay-per-view, it's actually cheap. So I would encourage you to go ahead and pay it and watch it and enjoy it. So don't be uptight that it's a pay-per-view.
I haven't heard officially if they're doing that. Do you know if they are for sure? I assume they are. They did it last year, but I don't know.
I don't know either. I assume it because they did last year. And I just heard some of the reining industry say, why isn't it free and who wants to pay for it? It's no big deal. There's a lot of production costs go into this stuff, and the fact that you can get the enjoyment of following this sport at home is actually a blessing. So count your blessing.
Yes, I very much agree. I'll be there on site actually doing a behind the curtains sort of podcast style series. So if you're there in person, say hi, but definitely catch the live stream if you can, because those horses are unbelievable.
Well, that is just great. Hey, before we close this thing up, I just found myself a note and I'd lost my timing here because the time to have said this was earlier when we were talking about patterns. I have to give a little bit of kudos to our NRHA Judges Committee, and this, Brian, you would appreciate this too, from guys that have sit in the chairs for a really long time. I don't know who gets credit for this, probably Patty, because there's been lots of chairs and none of it has happened. But to now have show committees have the ability to have people trot into the arena on a pattern. I mean, you can request that, or even some horses that have to lope in on patterns now. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Believe me, it'll take hours off the day. So yeah, it takes very little to make judges happy sometimes. That is a great idea. But anyway, I have enjoyed the heck out of this show. I can't wait for our next one. I don't know what we're going to do. But again, we've got some really good stuff on the horizon, and yeah, I mean, I just can't thank you enough. Go ahead.
We have a couple guests that we've got on the schedule that we can't release yet, but anyways, that's one. And then the NRBC is coming up in April, so we've got some shows coming your way. Stay tuned, cowboyoffice.com. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us in this episode. You always bring Jody and I together even better, so we appreciate that. Horses are good for people as competition breeds character. Enjoy the ride and see you next time.
Absolutely. Chels, thank you. You're kind of like the rose between the thorns. But anyway, thank all you viewers. Stay in the middle. Yeah. Can't wait till next time.
Today I'm a green rose. It's always an honor to be with you guys. Thanks for having me. See you next time. Today's episode is brought to you by 4D Productions in cooperation with the Consultment Agency, a full-service agency that helps bring forward-thinking equine brands into the 21st century using digital skills and services such as website development, graphic design, social media, and media production such as the podcast you're consuming here today. Thank you so much for riding along with us today. Sign up at cowboyoffice.com to be the first to know about topics affecting the industry we love so much. You can reach out to us with topics you care about by finding us on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and all podcast platforms. And remember, share this episode with someone that may enjoy it, because the more we can share our horses with others, the better our world will be.